Well, hey, howdy there, listener. I hope you're doing well. You might notice in this episode my voice is a little bit foggy. Froggy? Froggy is the word I wanted. Froggy. Getting over a virus, a bit of a throat thing. It's kind of incredible that even in COVID world where I really don't see much of anybody without my mask other than my man person and the one other person in our pod, they somehow managed to catch a cold. It's weird, but whatever. Anyway, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. COVID negative. Did that once already. Don't need to do it again. This episode is the first in a series of much shorter episodes. We're going to do a little experiment here. I want to dive into common concepts that we talk about on the show, things that guests have talked about, or we kind of reference in passing really often that you might be curious about and want some more information about, so that you're upping your general vernacular, your understanding of some of the concepts that are really common on the show. Like I say, they'll be short, be these quick deep dives into concepts. And at the end of them, I want to introduce these tangible practices and takeaways, things that you can use to bring the concept to life in your life. And it's twofold, that you'll have ways to bring practices for yourself, and also that when guests are on and talking about these things, you'll be more fluent in the language of whether it's positive psychology or fitness or whatever. So if you are hearing this intro and there are things that you want to learn more about, that you are curious about, I'm going to put this out on other channels as well. But it would be helpful for me, oh dear listener, if you would email me, darlene@darlene.coach, or send me a DM. Instagram is @darlene.coach. And then I know what you want to learn about, instead of, making assumptions based off of plays or places that people often repeat our episodes, or just the things that clients ask about. So hit me up. And if you're an Instagrammy person, you can follow me there. Quick plug. So let's get to it. So if you took an intro to psychology course somewhere in your education, as I did, and dependent on what decade you took that course, you very likely studied abnormal psychology, like the things that are wrong with us as a species, not like you and I right now, but depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, like what are the things that humans suffer from in the mind? That's traditional psych. And that's what I studied, when I was an undergrad in the early 2000s, in the aughts, as they say these days. I took an intro psych class, and it was abnormal psych. And I think there was some developmental psych in there, some behavioral psych, but it really was like, this is what normal is, and this is what's outside of normal. If you were lucky enough listening to this to be young enough to just be an undergrad in these last 5 years or so, you might have taken a course that included positive psychology, but it's still a big might. Like, it's not out in the world as much. And when we look at traditional psychology, that traditional model of emotion, it primarily focuses on the negative emotions. And we're fortunate that is changing, but most of the research on emotion is on negative emotion. And negative emotion is about adapting to something, responding to something to keep our ancestors safe. So if you felt fear, you had a specific response, right? Flee. If you felt, if there was a threat or you needed to attain a certain resource that was necessary to survival, right? The absence of a resource being a bit of a threat in itself, you feel a sense of aggression. Reinforcing boundaries within a social structure is shame or guilt, where we're saying, okay, that's not okay. Shame, shame, shame. And then you feel ashamed. Or you do something that you know is knowingly wrong, and then you feel guilty, right? So those are adaptations to keep social cohesion. And it's useful in a moment of negative experience, right? Those negative emotions create a point of singular focus. They narrow our minds down so that if I need to flee, I can process the information, help me get away from some aggressor, some threat, some animal. If I need to fight, the upregulation of my nervous system and adrenal hormones helps to narrow my focus and sharpen your instincts, your response time, improve your vision, improve your hearing. I remember probably 13 years ago, someone tried to mug me, and that feeling that time had slowed down, the time distortion that you experience in one of those moments is actually an acceleration of your own processing time. It's your time that is slowed in your mind that makes it, or sorry, your time is speeding up in your mind that it makes everything else feel slower. And it's intense. Like anybody who's ever been through something like that can tell you it's an intense sensation. But that increased our likelihood of survival because it marshaled your focus and your resources. And it's a preset script of responses responding to a negative. We call that specific action tendency. So fear equals flee, anger equals attack, shame equals, feel negative and don't repeat. And we needed them to survive as a species. Our ancestors survived because of these specific action tendencies allowed them to respond to threat and be successful. We get a tribal cohesion from the negative, shame, guilt. And I think another great example is disgust equals revulsion. Like when you're disgusted with something, you actually feel physically unwell. So unsanitary things get coded into our social structure. I know people who keep kosher who the idea of eating pork actually makes them, physically revolted. And in this traditional model where we look at specific action tendency, positive emotions were throwaway. They're like, that's just so you feel good. And that's what this episode's about today, is about the positive side of things. It's about feeling good. Because I think it's kind of funny when you consider that in those traditional research circles, if the positive emotions were throwaway because they're about feeling good, where's the priority in that statement? Right? The priority is about being obsessed with the bad stuff instead of not just returning to baseline, but hearken to the name of the show, being better than the baseline, better than fine. So feeling good, not in the hedonic sense, but like in a lasting, positive, contributing, well-being sense, feeling good becomes paramount. And then understanding the positive emotions become important when we look at it from a different lens, when you think about it from a different angle. Because it's funny to me that like feeling good in itself wasn't important enough. It is to me. So Barbara Fredrickson, research scientist, again, early aughts, she's the first to propose what becomes very well known in the positive psychology world. And if you've listened to any of the positive psychology expert episodes, and we talk about Fredrickson, we talk about broaden and build, or we talk about positive emotion, like this is who we're talking about. And it's the theory that positive emotions don't function like negative emotions in the mind and in the body. And she was the one that picked up on that positive emotions don't have specific action tendencies. They don't encourage us to just tie down to a specific action. And now, fortunately, we have enough technology that we can measure this in the minds of research subjects, that positive emotions open us up. They encourage us to explore our world and to dive deeper into the things that are around us. So instead of being a specific set action, right? I am afraid, I hide, or I flee. It's a constellation of things to explore. So like joy primes us to go off and play, to just play and explore and be silly. Curiosity wants us to follow it so that we can learn more about our world. Think about the last time you were really just engrossed in a subject. Big spoiler here for me, it's been positive psychology for the last 3 years. Your curiosity drives you to learn new and important skills. I've recently had someone in my life who's been asking me to teach them a lot of things. And as I was thinking about like, okay, how do I want to teach this person the structure of what they're asking me for? How did I learn it? And I realized that what I learned was from my curiosity. I just followed my curiosity. Oh, I'm curious about, I used to have a YouTube channel years ago. And I'm curious about video editing as a consequence. If I'm going to post YouTube videos, I got to be able to edit them. So I taught myself video editing because I was curious. The thing that I wanted was worth enough to learn stuff. I know how to knit, crochet, sew, and embroider because I wanted to be able to do those things. So when you're curious is when you pick up new skill sets because they enliven you. Or big one out there in the world right now is gratitude. Right? Everybody's talking about, oh, I'm so grateful. I've got all this gratitude. Da, da, da. Well, it's based on this concept of Fredrickson's. Gratitude is about appreciation and connection. And this phenomenon came to be known, labeled by Fredrickson, as broaden and build. Broaden in that it increases our neuroplasticity. That means it opens our awareness. It makes our brains more flexible. It increases curiosity and connection. So it opens us up to the world. The good stuff makes us more open to experiences and new information. And on the build side of things, it builds in that it fosters these new relationships, these new resources, these new skill sets. Because when you're playing and learning, you come away from the experience with new ideas, with new friends, with new allies, so that then when times are lean, you have more resources to draw on. And then you're more likely to survive. So part of her argument is that it wasn't just the negative emotions with the specific action tendencies that we needed to survive. It was having the good juju, because we equally survived because we had better allies, we had more information, we had more creativity, we had more problem solving, we had more resources at our disposal, and then challenges weren't so hard. And the theory is also that the positive emotions is what stitched us together. It bonded individuals and groups, and it grew our new ideas. And it's not purely theoretical anymore. Research has fortunately now tested these theories. We have fMRI studies. We have priming and behavioral studies. So like a behavioral study, you might like show, research subjects a funny video or something, that would be priming humor. And then set up a construct where we can see, are they nicer to strangers? Do they appreciate nature more? So those who've been primed in this way, not necessarily for humor, but for any positive emotion, positive experience, they've been shown to be more creative, more friendly. They're more likely to help strangers. After you've gone through something good, you're more likely to be open to that stranger and to helping them. And they actually exhibit less subconscious racial bias. That's my favorite one. They have actually studied and tested and proven that people who have been through this kind of priming are, subconscious racial bias is when you're unaware that you treat people of a different race than you treat people of your own race. And it exists even when you don't think you have it, right? That's the subconscious part. Well, people who have been primed with a good experience, in some cases, don't even exhibit it. They treat everyone the same. So the happier you are, the less subconscious racial bias you have, the nicer you are to strangers. I think that's my favorite tidbit about positive emotion, especially, in the wake of what's been unearthed in our country. I don't even want to say what's happening in our country because it's been happening for so long. What's unearthed recently in the consciousness of a good chunk of our country. And there's a bunch more. I don't want to beat this too hard, but one of the big criticisms of research on happiness, we don't really use the word happiness in the positive psychology world, but we will for the sake of this podcast. But one of the big criticisms in general is that it glosses over the hard things in life. So I just want to go on the record and say, I'm not saying to pretend that things aren't difficult, and I'm not saying to gloss over human suffering, including your own or anyone else's. And I'm not saying don't feel your feelings, whatever they are. But what I am saying is if we need creativity and cooperation and less divisiveness to get out of some of the messes that we are building as a species, then this stuff becomes really important because it can help teach us the mechanisms to build bridges instead of walls. Now, one of the cool things is, unlike negative emotion, positive emotion, I think I mentioned this earlier, don't have specific action tendencies, which means that each of us expresses these positive feelings in our own unique way. So when I say joy, which is one of Fredrickson's identified 10 positive emotions, and if you want more information on any of this, she's got a great book called Positivity. You can build some of this off of. But when I say joy, you have a different experience of joy than I do. And sometimes the reactions are the same. Like, we both will probably laugh at something that's really funny, and our faces will light up when we see a happy baby. Thinking of my baby niece right now in my own head. And that's, if you're watching on YouTube, that's why I'm smiling so much. But what triggers joy and how you might express joy is unique to you. I think that's really neat. So there are 9 other primary positive emotions in Fredrickson's work. So it's not only limited to those 9, but the 9 other that she talks about other than joy. We've got gratitude. We talked about that a little bit. That's the genuine appreciation for something outside of yourself. Now, it's not to be confused with obligation, which when I started doing my own gratitude work, I found that I had a lot of that, like slapped on the back of the head and told to say thank you feeling. That's obligation. It's not gratitude. Because true gratitude opens you up to recognizing that there are good things beyond ourselves. And it encourages us to connect with others because of that goodness. So it's conditioning a recognition of the goodness in the world in your feelings. I think that's cool. The next one is serenity. When coaching clients, I'll often ask them how they want to feel, and they'll tell me that they want ease or they want peace. And this is what they're talking about. It's calm, safety. It's the ability to let go and relax because you have calmness and safety. It often comes with a nice subtle feeling of connection, that like all is right in the world. Again, I'm thinking of my baby niece sleeping soundly. Serenity. Man, I miss that kid. Stinking COVID. I can't wait to see that kid. The next one is interest. This is that curiosity thing. It's that spark that leans you into something. You want to learn a deeper nuance. You want to find out about stuff. Calling has been coming up a lot lately in coaching. And interest to me includes calling. Like, what do you want to do? I don't know if maybe sometimes you're called and you don't want to do it because it's changes that you're afraid to make, but you're still curious. You're still interested. You're still being called to the at bat. And it feels good to dive into something you want to learn, right? I think it's like an itch that you finally get to scratch. And that's a good example of build because you come away from it with something new. When's the last time you let yourself get really curious about how something worked or how something came into being? Next is hope. Hope is huge. I cannot overestimate the value of hope because it is a salve to so much that we are dealing with right now. It's a repairing emotion. It makes us more we call it pro-social, more like connected to others, more likely to do good with others. Dan Tomasulo has a book called Learned Hopefulness. And he talks about hope as the only positive emotion that builds on negative emotions. And I'm not 100% sure that I agree, because I think you can be in something good and hope that it gets even better. And you can hope for a positive outcome after a lot of effort. But I think his point is that when you are dealing with something really hard, hope is often what gives you the tenacity to keep going. I think that's part of where that nugget is. And when you have hope, you try. And it gets you to stretch your capabilities because you believe in the possible. Right? You have to believe something is possible in order to try to do it. I'm a big old fan of hope, in case you can't tell. Who wouldn't be? Who wouldn't be a fan of hope? No shade. If you struggle with hope, feel free to reach out and ask me more questions. The next one is pride. And I think that this is something that we struggle with because it's not selfishness. It's not arrogance. Those are something else. And I think often people struggle in celebrating their accomplishments because they're afraid of crossing that line over into arrogance and narcissism. But it's when you're actually truly, genuinely proud of something. And the difference, I think, is ego. Narcissism and arrogance are ego-driven. Pride is like at your core. It's when you followed that interest and curiosity so far that you can look back and go, yeah, I did that. Ooh. Now, when's the last time that you told someone you were proud of them? Because I think that we're not really taught, at least we haven't been in America in a long time, to enjoy the pride of our accomplishments. And what this does is rob us of the positive effects of our efforts. Some of that is puritanical bullshit, right? Like working for work's sake, and that's how you get closer to God and blah, blah, blah. But the trick is that being proud of ourselves actually drives achievement. Because if we don't try for new heights, for new things, then all we feel is more disappointment and shame. So learning how to celebrate what you've done, I think, is an important part of the growth and positive emotion. And celebrating the pride that we have in one another and being able to genuinely receive those compliments. The other day, the man person told me how proud he was of me, and I was tearing up a little bit because it meant so much to me that he thinks so and that he buys into what I'm doing. So I encourage you to foster some positive pride out there with the people in your world. The next one is humor, which in my personal list is just labeled as laughing your ass off. It's fun. I believe that when it comes from needs of self-actualization, fun is an essential component to that coming to life. All right, we're almost through. We're almost through, my friends. Inspiration. How incredible does it feel for you when you feel inspired by something? This is one of the self-transcendent emotions because it connects you to something outside of yourself. It feels like you're part of something greater. I think of back in my adolescence, I played a lot of music and I would often wake in the middle of the night with lyrics in my head. And that feeling that they had just been communicated to me by the universe was self-transcendent. When I would give a really good performance and I would lose myself in doing it. That happens sometimes on the podcast too. Just that being taken by the muse and then running with it. And it's tricky in a world where we're taught to compare ourselves. But if you can find a way to let go of that and open up and really create. To me, that's what living is at its core, is this emergent horizon of creation. And that is the nature of inspiration in my mind. Another self-transcendent emotion, one I love to talk about, is awe. And I think of two things. And first is the Grand Canyon. First off, I love the desert, and there's a slice of the Grand Canyon as you go down that is a desert ecosystem, desert biome. And I loved being there. But breaking the rim on a day-long hike from rim to river, hiking all the way down, and knowing that you have just barely scratched the surface. And as big as that one piece of the world is, it's still only the littlest piece, right? And kind of taking that one step further, the other thing I think of when I think about awe is space. I love thinking about the challenge of going to Mars and what it would be like, and the scientific and philosophical questions to be answered in solving the puzzle of going to another planet, not just our moon, but a planet. Because it makes me feel both small and powerful at the same time, right? Like, I'm just one little person, but also the combined sum total of the emergent creative problem solving of an entire species. What could we do together? That's power. And that's how I think of it as awe. So on the ground, yes, it's another self-transcendent emotion, but you feel the boundaries of yourself emergent into others just kind of melt away. You connect beyond your understanding of the current world, and your idea of how the world works gets rewritten. You feel somehow different from the experience. Like your schema, your idea of the rules of existence shifted. I've talked to new parents about the awe they feel at birth, right? The birth of their child. And now their reality is the same but different. And it will never go back, the parts that are different. And all of these positive emotions, Fredrickson point out, build up to the 10th, which is love. Because love has all of these plus trust. I mean, meaningful, lasting love, not, like lust, flash in the pan. And oftentimes in this meaningful, lasting love, there's a projection into the future. It's not just passion and interest, but everything else that goes into that. And Fredrickson intentionally saves it for last because it envelops all the others if you're trying to understand it. So those are Fredrickson's positive emotions, and others have been researched and argued for, but I kept it to this list because it's like the classic list of the originator. And at a time when there's a lot to be upset about, and there is, I admit it, I want to take a moment to advocate why you should care about this. Because I mentioned before, focusing on the good stuff isn't about ignoring that things are hard. It might actually be the solution. Because to help others, you have to be solid enough in yourself to be useful to others. And to build a bright future, we have to also be resourceful. We have to be connected. We have to be awake. And I chose awake and not woke because that's not what I mean. I don't mean woke. I mean, like, you got to have the lights on in yourself. Now, solving the world's problem doesn't mean repeating the same broken systems of anger and oppression and hatred. It means building a new world based on other things. I'd like to think that this show is about some of those other things. If that's me being arrogant, sorry. I hope that's pride and not arrogance. I've worked with many clients who have resolved some of their depression and anxiety with a therapist, and then they've gotten a life coach to make them more productive and high performing. And then they eventually come to me And we talk about, well, what else goes in the container of all that productivity and high performance? I like to think that it's this. These are the things. When you pull out all the bad stuff, you've got an empty space. The good stuff should be filling up that space. But if no one has taught you about the good stuff, how would you know that this is it? This is the good stuff. So in the lab, people who have been primed with a positive experience produce more solutions when they're given problems to solve, right? That's why we say they're more creative, because their problem solving skills enhance. And in research on real life, people who score higher on happiness are more successful. And it's not just self-reported success, like make more money or get good grades or get jobs or whatever. They're experiencing actual more gratitude, humor, awe, and joy. And so they went further in life because of that. And my final little bit of evidence here is that people who score higher in positive emotion, they weather adversity better because their minds are more flexible. They find more solutions. They take less physical damage from the stress. Hopefully you're convinced by now, but then the question becomes, what did you do? How do you do it? Well, there's two general approaches. You can remove negative emotions. This would be things like cutting out toxic people, using cognitive behavioral therapy techniques to combat negative thoughts. You could increase your mindfulness. There's meditation. There's also 2 older episodes on mindfulness. Number 3 is What the Hell is Mindfulness? And number 26 is an interview with Leah D'Souza on mindful practices other than meditation. You could learn about triggers, how to unpack them, heal them, manage them. And notice I didn't say avoid. I think trigger avoidance doesn't heal you or help the world. Being brave enough to unpack them and learn from them and heal them like you would a wound. That's what I'm advocating for. Consider a media diet. That'll remove a lot of negativity. It certainly has for my life. And also to shift the meanings that you prescribe to things, the stories that you tell yourself about what things mean. And if that's something that you think you might struggle with, again, like find a qualified therapist. You can use cognitive behavioral therapy techniques to help you shift that story in your head. And the other thing, I said there's 2 ways you can go about this. The other one is to intentionally seed positives. Now, it has to be an earnest effort or it's nonsense. Like yellow smiley faces are the nonsense side. But the earnest effort to seed the good stuff means opening up, getting vulnerable with yourself, being honest about what you like and what you don't, and then taking the time to actually savor things and let it seep in. So savoring is the intentional enjoyment of something. You know, my insomnia improved. Such a weird story. My insomnia, which I've had for decades, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll just lay there. I think a lot of us can relate to that. And oftentimes I would tell myself the story, I've only got 90 minutes until my next session. I got to get up. And that does not help anybody fall back to sleep. First off, like looking at the phone, worst thing you could do. Assessing out the time, second worst thing you could do. But as I started to get into the positive psychology and behavioral worlds and understand this interchange between what my mind says and what my body does, and vice versa, I came to understand that if I tell myself a different story in the middle of the night, I don't panic. And the story was I bought myself the nicest sheets I could find. And then, of course, my grandmother bought me even better ones. They're like flannel ones with little camels and hearts on them. I called them the love camels. And in the middle of the night, when I can't sleep, I just rub my feet against the sheets and feel how nice they feel. And I fall back to sleep better. I just tell myself like, oh, they're so soft. They're so nice. I love my sheets. And by savoring my sheets, I fall back asleep instead of freaking out. And my insomnia has gotten way better. You can share your good stuff with people that you trust. Genuine people who you definitely trust, that will celebrate them with you and help you learn to be proud of yourself. And owning that we all have different lives, and maybe you don't have somebody in your life that you feel like you can do that with. Imgur, IMGUR, is one of my favorite pastimes to just like swipe through the front page. It's an app you can download. And regularly people will post things that are like, I don't have anyone else to share this with, but I just wanted to tell somebody this good thing has happened. And as a community, they like upvote and celebrate with you. So even if you don't have anyone in your life, you could take it outside. You could find a Reddit board. You could find, through the power of the internet, a community that would celebrate with you. Know that that is out there. Next one, you can go outside. Nature has been shown to have a profound positive effect on disposition. So even when it's cold, you could savor that too. I think there's a way to still do it. And then last one we're going to leave you with, the one that I love, is straight out of Fredrickson's practices in her book Positivity. It's called the Positivity Portfolio. So I did this as an assignment for grad school. You're going to pick one of the 10 emotions, and you're going to build yourself a little ritual, a little experience to try to prime that emotion in yourself. And what I realized as I was reading Fredrickson's book is that I was not very good at experiencing joy. This is post-divorce. This is when a bunch of nonsense was going on in my life. And it had just been too long. And when I tried to pull up the experience of joy emotionally, I just couldn't connect to it. So for this assignment, instead of like having a physical portfolio, I built myself an altar, and I spent time with it, intentional time every night. I played my ukulele. I looked through some old photo books that my mom had made, and I realized something that now I'm like, duh, but my joy comes from connection with other people. And maybe you hear that and you're like, I'm too much of an introvert, Darlene. My joy is being alone. That's my point. We all experience joy differently. But I had forgotten that about myself. But when you're open to trying these things, this is where being open comes in, because you might learn some things about yourself that you didn't know before or you had forgotten. You might experience things that are different than what you had before. But if you're trying to change things in your life, that's a good thing. We want it to be different than it was before. And that's what we're after. And that's your primer on positive emotions. I hope you got a lot out of it. I would love to hear your questions, and I'd love to hear what more you'd like to dive into in future episode. So reach out, Instagram @darlene.coach, email darlene@darlene.coach, and there's more to come, more like this on the fly. And enjoy.